Yeah.
Mhm.
So not too much into the president's words, but let's talk about the position of the Philippines itself. No,
Mm.
the Department
Mhm.
of Foreign Affairs came out with a statement expressing concern, calling for dialogue, and also
Mhm.
reiterating that the government continues to abide by its one China policy. Before we really tackle that, I want to ask you, perhaps you can explain to us how the Philippines currently implements its one China policy. Does it differ compared to the USS, for instance, and how does it also differ from what we see Chinese officials calling the one China principle?
Right,
There is
right,
a
right.
distinct difference between those two things, and we ascribe to
Mm.
the one China policy, right? Not the one China
Mm.
principle.
Mhm. Well, you can think of it this way. You're right. No, the one China principle basically refers to China's position. No, and China's position is that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, both historically and more importantly, no, today as we speak, no, in politically. No, therefore there is only but one legal government for the whole of China, which includes the mainland and Taiwan, and that is the CPC-controlled government of the People's Republic of China. So to summarize it, yung one China principle, two things are important, no? For one to embrace the one China principle. First, recognition that Taiwan is part of PRC's territory and that there's only one legal government that exists, and that is the government in PRC. No? So this particular understanding has many implications politically, historically, no, and formally in terms of establishing diplomatic relations with other countries. No? And by outlining these implications, I think our listeners can understand more how the One China principle is appreciated by China. No? First, given that there's only one China legally, uh, then it follows that there is only one main and distinct representative for the entire Chinese nation in international fora or organizations such as, say, the United Nations. No? So the UN cannot recognize two Chinas. So you have this resolution adopted by the United Nations back in 1971, which basically restored the seat to PRC and identifying Taiwan as Taiwan province of China. So internationally, there's only one China. And congruent with this understanding, it's also the official foreign policy position of China that relations with other countries will only be established, no, at the very minimum if they recognize that the PRC government is the sole legal government of China. And this is where the one China policy comes in. No? So
Mhm.
yung one China policy naman is sort of a minimum version of embracing the one China principle. And this is really the status quo or the mean average for most countries that China has official relations with. It's recognizing the legitimacy of the government in PRC ruling over one China, no? And at the very least, acknowledging China's perspective as embodied in the one China principle, right? So if I may read for our listeners, no, yung 1975 joint communique natin with China. Um, Basically, the Philippine government, according to that document, that important document in 1975, establishing our bilateral relations with China. So the Philippine government recognizes the government of the PRC as the sole legal government of China and fully understand and respects the position of the Chinese government that there is but one China and that Taiwan is a part of Chinese territory. No, I know it's a lot of words, no, but ang ganda nung pagkaka-organize nung communique kasi yung first sentence, it's recognition of the government of PRC. The second is parang, okay, we
Understand.
understand and respect the position of the Chinese government. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we would fully embrace it, no? Or that we would fight for it side by side with China, that Taiwan is an integral part of Chinese territory. And in the same manner, this one China policy is also sort of similar to the US one China policy. And this might be nitpicking na. The wording that we used was fully understand and respect. The wording that US used was acknowledge. So mas
Mhm.
malabnaw pa, if you will, yung ginamit ni US in reference to the one China principle. No?
Mhm.
I know I'm going in many directions at this point, but um, in terms of your question, whether we should change, parang ganun ba? Or
Yeah. What I want to ask from that, no, so there is that nuance about
mm,
there's a difference between recognizing the
mm,
government, um,
acknowledging, yeah,
acknowledging on the U.S., but for us, we say understand and fully respect. Um,
yes,
in a way, yeah, there's that nuance, and there is that they leave room for interpretation, I suppose.
mm,
But
mm,
that was in 1975.
right,
For
mm,
years, I mean, it's been
mm,
decades since. So I guess the next question that follows now is: should we change, or should the government change its position, or perhaps clarify or review its stand towards that? Um, Considering all the developments
mm.
that
Yun
happened
na
in the
nga
Philippines.
eh. Yeah, the wording itself is actually very it's a balancing act from the Philippines perspective, no? Kasi respect respect could mean it's not as malabnaw as acknowledge, pero
Mm,
respect has that certain, okay, we are one with you in the one China principle, but at the same time it's open for interpretation. Now to your question whether we should reconsider our one China policy at this point, I don't think it's in our national interest at this point, precisely because one, we are not directly involved with the conflict. Second, most importantly, it has worked for the past decades that we have established diplomatic relations with China. So why change something that is working in our national interest and in our in prolonging or in bettering relations with China, right? It won't change anything, and it would um third, sige, I'll add a third one. It's consistent with the other position of other countries that have official diplomatic relations with China. No? So in among ASEAN member countries, no, it's also the one China policy narrative that they adopt, right? So it's fairly consistent. If we're going to change it, the only direction that I'm seeing at this point is to perhaps adopt the position of the United States, which is what we call strategic ambiguity when it comes to upholding the one China policy. So now the United States is saying that, well, we never really identified which China to begin with. They are going into great lengths elaborating on that ambiguity. If we follow that route, it doesn't really serve our interest because we don't have any commitment with Taiwan to support them militarily or to uphold the peaceful resolution of or reunification of China and Taiwan. And then the other side naman is to fully embrace the one China principle, no? Which at this point no would look very awkward in the context of trying to strengthen the US Philippine alliance, right?
mhm,
So it's the one China policy of the Philippines as it's currently adopted is really a representation of our long-standing hedging strategy between these two major powers, right? And as other small powers in the region have consistently adopted as well. So,
mhm,
at this point, to wrap it up on that question, no, I don't see any need to reconsider the policy. It has worked for the past couple of decades, no, and we should keep it as is.